Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening, outlets.
Good dusk are outlets.
Good dusk. Oh, that's a good one. We
Yeah.
should start using that.
I think that needs to get picked
Yeah,
up.
I think it does. This is Shameless Plugs Podcast with Samantha the writer and my delightful co-host.
J.A. George.
Woohoo! We are here in the basement studio, and we again have a small guest, so if you hear a little bit of noise in the background, it is the newest Shameless Plugs family member.
Yes.
But we are also here with
we have another very
special guest, and
yes.
we are so excited. Oh, okay.
See, she's excited too.
I know, she's so excited to welcome BK Bass to our show.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So, BK is a speculative fiction writer. You've covered a whole bunch of different genres. Could you talk about that for a minute? What it's like, what your thought process is, and the different types of speculative fiction you've done, and what you see as kind of the same and different amongst them, and how you approach them?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the old school science fiction and fantasy, like the the pulp magazines back in the day, like in the early 20th century, the 30s and 40s, and things that came out in the 50s and 60s with Highland, stuff like that. So I've kind of been, not just like a fan, but like also consider myself a bit of a student of speculative fiction over the years. And, you've got your big overarching labels like, just science fiction and fantasy, but there's so many different ways to approach it. And, you've got things like under science fiction, you've got your military sci-fi, which I'm a huge fan of, things like Starship Troopers. Under fantasy, you've got, role-specific things. You've got, of course, your epic fantasy with Tolkien, and then you've got things like sword and sorcery, which would, make you think of Conan. With my own writing, I like exploring a lot of different genres and approaches, and my main series that I'm working on is called the Ravencrest Chronicles. That's flintlock fantasy and dark fantasy. So there's like vampires and zombies, but it's a setting where there's like, there's gunpowder is really the definition of flintlock, where there's, ships, cannons, and that's mostly because it's a nautical theme. It's set in a city called Sea Haven, and it's set on a coast, so there's pirates and stuff like that. One of my other series is more Conan inspired. It's called The Burning Sands, and it's all desert themed, but with like sword and sorcery, it's more gritty, anti-hero, not a lot of magic going on, you don't have your knights in shining armor, stuff like that, like you get with like your high fantasy. So I just like exploring a lot of different aspects of different ways of approaching, and sometimes the setting is very different. Sometimes even the characters can be different, like your sword and sorcery has your anti-heroes, your high fantasy sometimes has your reluctant hero. There's a lot of different ways to approach it.
So usually when you ask a writer, what do you write? You get a very specific answer, but it sounds like with you it's a variety of things. How did you kind of stumble into that? All those different subgenres, I guess.
Because there's more.
Stumbling is a good word for it. That's actually what happened. I kind of accidentally fell into it. My goal at the very beginning of the process was I was going to write military sci-fi and epic fantasy.
Nice.
That was all I was planning on doing. Excuse me. And I was working on a military sci-fi novel that actually kind of devolved into a futuristic Western, and it's still a work in progress. I'm 46,000 words into it. It's only about halfway done. But I wrote those 46,000 words in about 6 weeks.
Wow.
And I got to the point where I was burning out on it. It was like 16 hours a day every day.
Yeah.
So just this one Friday, I decided I'd take a break and just try writing something different just for fun.
Yeah.
Well, that turned out to be Sea Haven, the first book that I actually self-published.
Nice.
And I was always a big fan of the Sword series by Fritz Leiber.
Okay.
They're set in a city called Lankhmar. It's like an urban fantasy centered around thieves. It's dark anti-heroes, things like that. It's basically the classic sword and sorcery other than Conan. He was actually, Sword and Sorcery is named after the Sword series that he wrote. So I'm writing something in that style, and, over the course of 2 days, I finished this book, and I'm like, wow, this was incredibly fun. So I kept writing on that, and it just made me realize I really wanted to write just quick, fun, short, like novellas and stuff like that, and that way I could explore different options and opportunities. And that's when I started really studying the different genres, reading more into them, discovering what I wanted to, play around with.
So I think you touch on something that's kind of interesting there, and I'm sorry if I rabbit hole us here, but so you talked about getting burned out on a story, which I think is pretty standard for a lot of writers.
Yeah.
But a lot of times people just try to push through it, and I think your tactic is a little more successful sometimes when you kind of just diverge from it and try something completely different, something new and fun, and kind of reset your brain. So I like that, and as kind of advice for our outlets, maybe that's something to try if you feel yourself getting burned out on a story.
Oh, absolutely. It's worked out really well for me. I'm working on sword and sorcery, high fantasy, epic fantasy. I've got some cosmic horror that I'm working on. I bounce around.
Nice.
And, I might finish one novella completely before I move on to something else, or I might write 4 or 5 chapters and then, work on outlining something else. It just kind of depends on my mood any given day. It's slowed down the process as far as I'm not going to get one book done as fast as I would, but it keeps me moving and keeps me motivated, because I might get up one day and say, I don't feel like writing prose, but I feel like doing an outline, so I'll outline another project. Or I'll brainstorm on something else. It's just depending on what my mood is, that's what I do, and it keeps me working, even though it's not one project from start to finish as fast. There's always something going on.
But I think that probably leads to a more successful end product. If you're writing something that you're interested in, excited about, passionate about, that shows through in the end product. I think readers will pick up on that.
Agreed.
So maybe it takes you longer, but the quality of work is, I would guess, probably higher.
I would think so, yeah. And it's none of it feels forced, because I'm always doing what I feel like doing.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't get to the point where it feels like, oh, I have to go to work today.
Yeah.
I just out of curiosity, do you ever find yourself mixing up your characters at all? If you're working on multiple projects, do some of your characters try to sneak into your other work, or are they different enough that you kind of can keep them in their place, as we say?
The personalities are usually okay, because the settings and the situations are so different, because the different projects are all different genres and completely different worlds. I have a problem with the names, though. I noticed that I named an empire in one book, and then I went back to edit the other book, and it had the same empire in it. I was like, oh, crap. So I had to go through and change the name in the entire book. Every time it popped up, I had to change the name to something else. Because I thought that I came up with it originally when I invented it for the second book, but it was hiding in my brain somewhere and just popped out. I've got a couple characters, too. I've got 2 different worlds that have side characters that have the same name, but they're spelled differently. I just let that go. I didn't.
Nice.
It wasn't a big.
Nice. I like it.
I approve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you've also written articles about, I know that you've written all different styles of fiction, you've written poetry, you've written novellas and everything else, but you've also written some articles that are on your website. So could you tell us a little bit about those and how those might be useful or interesting to our listeners?
Absolutely. Yeah, on my own website, I've got articles where I've done genre studies where, in the research I was doing for, my own writing, I really delved into finding out more about each of the genres. So I went ahead and wrote, I've got a series of, I think it's 4 or 5 articles about fantasy, where I've got the history of fantasy fiction itself, and then there's, I think, 3 articles that delve into different subsets of subgenres. I've got One that's all about the different punk genres, like steampunk and cyberpunk and biopunk and all of those.
Nice.
I started doing the same thing with science fiction. I've got to go back to it. I did the history, but I haven't done the subgenres yet, so I've still got to work on that. But it kind of tells you the history of it, gives some examples of some of the more popular works, or not names like Tolkien and Lewis, the ones that everybody's familiar with, but a couple of little more obscure ones in there too. Kind of as examples of, this is what, kind of the father or mother of this genre is this person in this book. And then also on the publishing website, on Kyanite Publishing that I'm a part of, I'm doing a series there called Discovering New Worlds with PK Bass. And there I do kind of the same thing, but each article is just one subgenre. And I'll have a real short description, kind of like what I did with the genre studies, but then I'll actually write a flash fiction short story in that genre. So I've got 3 on there now. I've got planetary romance, social science fiction, and there's one other off the top of my head. I can't remember what it is, but I'll have it's like a 300 to 500 word description of what the genre is and the history of it, and then there will be like 1,000 to 2,000 word short story that I wrote as an example of it. It's kind of like my playground in it.
Very cool. And I know you mentioned the different punk subgenres there. You've written cyberpunk with the night shift story, and you mentioned something else that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about. Kyanite.
Yeah.
In addition to being an author, you're a publisher as well.
Yes.
So I know that's been going for a little bit now. Can you tell us kind of what your experiences have been as a publisher? What's different, what's similar, and what maybe some things that you expected or didn't expect? Just tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a publisher as well.
I didn't expect it to blow up the way it has, really. My 2 partners and I, Sam and Sophia, we started off and were expecting, when we opened up our open submissions, when people to send us books.
Oh, hold on
one second. We thought we might get 30 units out of there. We ended up getting, I think, about 250 submissions for books.
Wow.
We're still working through those. That was from the fall. So the feedback from everybody, the community engagement. I also didn't expect how much other side work there would be, just the business management. And I should have, because I've been in business management almost my entire life, but just all the little nitty-gritty. When you've only got 3 people doing it, it's a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
The accounting and things like that. It's just been a lot of work doing that. But it's been really rewarding, though, just how pleased everybody is with the job that we're doing. And, everybody's really, Ed we signed, has been really excited to be part of the process. So that's been great. It's really built a community around it, and I'm really happy about that.
Nice. Well, we've had Sophia was on the podcast a couple months ago, and that was, I think, right at the beginning for you guys. So to have her perspective on it at the beginning and your perspective now is really interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's really grown since then. When she was on, we were just getting started.
Yeah.
Now we've got over 20 signed authors for books.
Holy cow,
we've
that's
got
awesome.
we're about halfway through the year as far as the magazine that we do bi-monthly. We're up to, I'd have to count, maybe 50 authors that have been in the magazine now. So it's really blown up and gotten huge.
Yeah, there's a lot of authors who are known, who have these decent-sized followings on Twitter, and then another Kyanite author.
Yeah,
oh, another
exactly,
Kyanite author.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're just taking over the world very slowly, very quickly.
That's good.
You've got a good crew to take over the world with. Several
Oh, yeah,
past and
absolutely.
future guests of our show. So what's next for Kyanite then, I guess would be my question.
Well, we're actually just starting to get into our release cycle. It's been all acquisitions and production, and we're really hitting production really heavy right now. Editing is really our big focus right now. Our first actual book release, if you don't count the ebooks, our first print book, I should say, is actually the Raven Press Chronicles. Is my book coming out.
Nice.
But following up on that, we've got a lot of things lined up, and a big variety. And something cool, we're talking about subgenres and stuff. There's a lot of genres coming out. We've got Stephen Coughlin has Urban Gothic coming out in March. That's a dreampunk novella that I edited. It's amazing. It will turn your brain upside down when you read it. It's a really neat story. Ryan Leslie, who's been on your show before, her book River's going to be coming out fairly soon.
That's right.
And that's because I thought so.
Kind of like that one's really different. It's like the style of a young adult book, like Hunger Games or something like that, but it's a very adult book.
Yeah.
So it's like young adult for adults. You definitely don't want your kids reading it. Teenagers would probably get a kick out of it. But we're definitely marketing it as an adult book. But,
Got it.
Citizen Averts from Joseph Kasabian, I'm really excited about. That's a military sci-fi, and Joe's actually a veteran.
Oh, wow.
I discovered him. He wrote a book called Hooligans of Kandahar, which was his own memoir of a tour that he served in Afghanistan and his experience in the city of Kandahar, which is an amazing war memoir, written from the dirt, from the grunt's view. Is how I discovered him. So his book's really amazing. And then we've got a bunch of like noir fantasy coming out with Magician's Sin and Blood Shadow and Zachariah Lars and the High Elf Mystery. There's all kinds of stuff coming out.
Nice.
Very cool.
And is all of this on the Kyanite website? So if our listeners want to go out and try to find you guys, where would they look?
Just go to kyanitepublishing.com.
All right.
And you'll see, the upcoming releases are all listed on the homepage. There's a link at the top that says catalog. That'll have everything that we've announced so far is all listed on there.
Nice.
Then the book has its own page, so you can go see, details on it. Just click on the book cover, and you can read the blurb and, find out the release date and all that good stuff.
How far out does your release calendar go right now? Because since you've got all of these authors and you're bringing on more, how far out are you guys planning ahead? How far out do you think you have products that are ready right now as opposed to the stuff that's still in the pipeline?
We have what we've got announced and scheduled out is going through September, I think is the latest date we have actually announced.
Okay.
Or no, October. We're going into October of this year. But we have some things not announced yet already scheduled for November and December of this year. And other things that are in the pipeline that aren't, in production or announced yet but are signed, we're already looking into March or April of 2020.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's like a kind of a dream almost, right? Because you're like, well, at least I know I got something until March or April of next year.
Yeah.
I mean.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and we've still got a lot of submissions that people sent. Like I said, the open submissions window was hundreds of books instead of 30.
Yeah.
So we've still got a lot there to look at and still working through those. So, by the time we get through all that, we're definitely, 2020 is going to be spoken for pretty much at this point.
Yeah.
When we open up another submissions window in the fall, we're going to be definitely looking at 2021 or later.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So what has it been like from the other side? Obviously, you're a writer. You know what it's like to put your work out there in the world and have people react to it. What is it like being the one doing the reacting from the publisher side?
Yeah, right?
It's a lot harder, actually. I've been in the position where I've submitted my work to publishers, and then you are on pins and needles until you hear back. And then, when you hear back and it's not positive feedback or, it's just, arbitrary, this isn't a good fit for us, which I do the same thing. Sometimes that's just the best way to handle things.
Yeah.
I know how difficult that is, and I know how it feels. So doing that, with other people's work, I know that they've put their heart and soul into this, and sometimes you just have to say no, that this isn't right for us.
Right.
And I hate doing it. It's hard. I don't like giving people bad news. I like making people happy and giving them good news. So, when I do have the opportunity to do that, when I send somebody an offer for a contract, that's great. I love it. It feels great. But 66 to 75% of the time, I'm saying no.
Right.
And, it's hard to do for me. I don't like saying no to people. I've always been the easygoing guy. But we're running a business, so we have to be responsible about it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So that really is interesting timing, because our last episode that we aired was an episode on criticism, taking criticism, giving criticism and all that, and I think that having you on here now saying that you've got all these submissions and, 65 to 75% of them you guys just can't take on or it's not a good fit, I think that's definitely an interesting perspective for our audience, who is probably looking at the publishing and saying, oh, well, I just wrote this amazing thing and I know it's going to get accepted and, but it's just the competition, it sounds like, is pretty fierce.
I'm going to submit to Kyanite.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, sometimes, you have to say no to something even if it is good, just because there's just not enough room. Like I mentioned, we're scheduled into 2020 right now, and, what we have to look at, we're definitely going to fill 2020, so there's just not enough spaces for everybody. So sometimes, there might be, let's say, look, if I'm looking at 10 books, and there's one that I definitely like, so that's going to definitely go in. And then there might be 3 that I definitely don't like. But then that still leaves 7 that are maybes. That, there might be 2 more spaces. So out of those 7, it's basically a competition of which 2 are best out of the 7 that I do like. Right. So it's not always, that it's bad or a bad fit. Sometimes it's just the other one was better.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is, I kind of like that phrasing, just, because it takes the, for a writer, you're always thinking my stuff is the best, I'm out there, I'm amazing, but sometimes something is just a little bit better. Something is just a little bit of a better fit. It doesn't mean that you're a bad writer. It just means that there's something that spoke to somebody.
Yeah, exactly. I think that you can't look past the fact that the person on the other end, who's the reader, is going to be bringing their expectations, their preferences, and everything to your work as well. From your perspective, what you're writing is amazing, but that agent might not feel the same way just because it's not their alley. It's not their cup of tea.
Right. Yeah. It's all subjective. And, sometimes it's a business decision too. Like there might be something that I absolutely love, but, am I going to find enough other people that love it that I can actually sell it?
Yeah.
Or does it fit the audience that we've built, that we can market to? And sometimes it might be like a certain genre that we're looking for. Like we might already have a whole bunch of this one genre already represented, but we want to diversify, and we're looking for something specifically a different kind of story.
Right. No, that makes complete sense. It's interesting to hear it from the publishing side of things, I think, because that's a lot of times a gray area for writers. As much as we like
there's
understand
so many different things that go into it. It's not just a black and white, is it good or is it bad decision. Is it good or is it bad? Is it better than the other? Does it fit what we're trying to do? Do we already have too much or not enough of it? There's so many different considerations.
So Kyanite covers several different genres right now. Do you see that expanding in the future? Do you see yourself specializing more and narrowing your focus a little bit? Is there any indication that you might change the genres that you offer?
Right now, our big goal is to focus on doing the best we possibly can with speculative fiction. Now, underneath that, we're open to any genre of speculative fiction, so any kind of sci-fi, fantasy, speculative horror. We're open to any of those genres. As far as anything outside of speculative fiction, we want to branch out in the future, but that's like a 5-year down the road kind of thing, probably.
Gotcha.
Like one thing, like crime thrillers and murder mysteries, things like that. Sam is actually a huge fan of those, and I like them too. So that's something we'd like to branch out into. But right now we want to focus on building an audience specifically as it relates to speculative fiction. We think if we diversify too fast, we're going to kind of like water down the market where we're not focused enough to be really successful at what we're doing.
Right. Makes sense.
All right. I think it is time.
So the short answer is yes, but down the road. Sorry.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
I think it's time for our 3 questions.
Yay!
Okay.
How we finish every episode. Every episode.
Yep. So you are next in the line of our guests to answer our fun questions. So
All right.
I don't remember the first one. I'm sorry, my brain just shut
I
off.
do not remember the first one.
Oh, I remember. Okay, sorry, my brain shut off for half a second. There it goes. It's back. Oh, I know. So, okay, this is this causes a lot of controversy on our show.
Just the two of us fighting.
Just the two of
that's
us
really
fighting
all
about
the
it. Yeah,
controversy
that's all it is. But we can blow it up and say it causes a lot of controversy. So, are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm actually a little bit of both. It depends on what I'm working on.
Yeah.
I like to say I'm a planter because I do both.
I like it.
Some of my novellas, I will just sit down and completely pants. I'll just completely write and see what happens. Like the Ravencrest Chronicles have been that way where I just sat down and started writing and it just happened. Then I have an epic fantasy book that I've got planned that is on a spreadsheet in Excel right now with 6 different subplots and I think 8 different point of view characters.
Nice.
So it just depends on what I'm working on, how complicated it is. Warriors of Understone I outlined, but it was a pretty basic outline, and it went completely off the rails by like chapter 7, and the end was it wasn't even the same book as what I outlined. So it just kind of depends on what I'm working on.
Nice.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually kind of suspected that was going to be the answer,
Yeah,
honestly.
agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, second question. We tend to get our best ideas at really inconvenient times. The shower, the car, falling asleep.
Yeah.
Where or when do you get your best ideas, and how do you deal with it? If they're at inconvenient times.
There's no specific where or when. It's just like what you just said. It could be the shower. It could be in the car. Half the time I'm sitting outside smoking a cigarette and I get this great idea.
Yeah.
I've got a notebook. I'm pretty old school, so I've got one of those old composition books, the black and white one that you took to college or high school with you. I've got one of those that I've got all kinds of plot ideas written down in, and I've got a little box of index cards, and I've got 3 different sections in that. I've got a section for like genre ideas I want to work on, sections for plots, and sections for just snappy lines that come to my mind.
Cool.
So like I might just pull cards out and put like 3 cards together and say, okay, that's the beginning of a book.
Nice.
I love to hear different writers' processes.
I do too.
That's awesome. Because everyone is so unique. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
the way that I write versus the way that Jay or George writes versus the way that you write. They're completely different. And I love the way that people come up with their ideas.
It's a creative process, so what works for one person is not going to work for another.
Absolutely.
You can find tips. Like I find tips online, and I'll try different stuff out until something works, and then I put it into the routine.
Yeah. That's awesome. The note card thing is really cool. I have not heard that one before. That's awesome.
Me either. I like that one.
Thank you.
And then our final question, seeing as how this is shameless plugs, and we like to plug new writers, plug anything really. What would you like to plug? Who, what, where? Your favorite breakfast joint? Your favorite writers? What can you plug today?
Well, the time that this airs should be just a few days before my book's coming out. The Ravencrest Chronicles Omnibus 1 is coming out on February 15th. And I've talked a little bit about the Ravencrest Chronicles books that I wrote, like Sea Haven. Those are all getting re-released as revised editions. They've been completely re-edited.
Oh, wow.
Actually rewrote parts of them. So those 4 books, Sea Haven, The Hunter's Apprentice, The Giant and the Fishes, and Tales from the Lusty Mermaid, they're each coming out in ebook format. And then the Ravencrest Chronicles Omnibus is all 4 of those books in a single volume. There's a paperback volume and a hardback. And the hardback actually has some bonus content, has an extra short story, and some of my own notes as far as the creation of the setting and the characters in there. So it's got about 2,500 extra words and alternative art. And it's a really nice hardback. It's, got the jacket and a gray cloth cover and everything. It's really, really handsome looking book. So that's coming out on the 15th. And then the week after that, another novella I have coming out is Warriors of Understone. And that's in a paperback. It's a 150-page paperback in a mass market paperback size, the 4x7, and also as an ebook. And that's the first in a new series that I'm working on called The Tales of Durgan Stoutheart. And that's heroic fantasy, and it's all dwarves.
Cool.
So giving the dwarves some love.
Nice.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
All right.
Well,
that'll bring us to the end of another episode.
I think we're at the end, so...
Major thanks to our guest, BK Bass.
Yay! Thank you!
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And all of the links to the books, to the websites, they will all be on our site. So check it out. Make sure you go check out BK's work. And I think that'll do it.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
So,
till next time. Bye, everybody.
bye, Outlet!